Thanks for joining on Twitch as well. So wherever you're streaming us from, whether it's your bedroom, office, couch, I hope you're comfortable and excited to be here. So let's just jump right into it. So my name is Barbitta. I'm a senior product manager for the Amazon Pinpoint service. And I get asked this question all the time, well, what does a product manager do exactly, especially within AWS? And I like to say that my job's pretty easy. I get to talk to a lot of customers, so I get feedback from you all on what you want AWS to build. I think it comes as no surprise, 80–90% of what we build is just based purely on customer feedback. So that's more or less a shameless plug for at the survey at the end of this. Any feedback you get does really matter and is important. So that's sort of what a product manager does. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about digital user engagement on AWS. Digital user engagement, in my mind, right, it's a little bit of a buzzword, I feel like, these days. But when I think about user engagement, I think about really my customers' customers, so the person on the receiving end of those notifications. And I think a lot about that because I am one of those customers as well, right? I get push notifications, I get emails, I get SMS. I get all the pings and dings and Outlook chirps, right? So I see all of that. And so I want to make that the best experience for your customers by building tools that enable you to do that. So the title of today's presentation is Transforming Customer Experiences by Leveraging AWS. And AWS, as many of you know, there's so many different services. It can be a little intimidating for new users. So I hope to demystify some common misconceptions as well as really focus in on the services that can enable certain user engagement. Right? There's not really one flavor that fits all. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The agenda, it's broken into 3 parts. So we'll go a little bit deeper. We'll start high and then we'll go narrow. So we're going to start with digital user engagement. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about Amazon Pinpoint. What that service does. It's relatively new, so you all might not know too much about it. And then finally, we'll go into demo. I really enjoy demos because if they work, you might be semi-impressed and remember a little bit. And if they don't work, then you'll certainly remember the presentation because I'll be up here trying to troubleshoot in real time. So that's the 3 parts. And then I always sort of lead with like one question. There's a lot of information that's available out there. There's a great slate of presentations today. So what's the one question I'm ultimately trying to answer? And I frame it as this, is how can I create delightful customer experiences? Delightful is emphasized because I think we can all say we received some sort of marketing communication or email or some sort of outreach where it hasn't been delightful, right? It's been an annoyance. And at that moment in time when you've been disappointed, annoyed, frustrated with engagement, with a brand, with a company, it's at that moment where you can really, I think, extract value, right? It's value is the delta between cost and perception of value, and so I think a lot about those very small moments, right? When your flight is delayed, how can we make that perfect? When you've reached a new accomplishment within a mobile application, how can we really engage with you and congratulate you on what you've done? So I want to talk about delightful customer experiences. So to do that, we'll work backwards from what we know as that traditional engagement no longer meets the customer's expectations. And so what does that mean? Well, there's a few buckets, but I think everyone can relate. When you receive a notification that's impersonal, that's frustrating. The audience, you might have received a notification that says, dear blank, or dear, and it has some random characters. Like it's that moment there where an impersonal notification, it really indicates to you, the end user, that the brand isn't thinking enough about you, right? They've just sent a blast email and they don't really know you. So why should you stop and read it and focus and give your energy, time, or money to this outreach? So we want to stop this generic impersonal messaging. Poorly timed engagements, right? That's also a problem, right? Time is one of the largest components of engagement. If you were able to get a notification to someone before they leave for the airport, letting them know their flight's delayed, that is much more valuable than sending them that notification when they're at the airport. So we're going to talk a little bit about time engagement and how you can think about your customers and the time that you engage with them. I think another great example is every morning I wake up, I check my email. check my spam email address, which I don't know if the audience has, but it's my one email that I sort of dedicate for all the stuff that I'm required to sign up. And I get all these notifications at 2, 3, 4 a.m. And I wonder, I said, who's reading these hours, and why are they sending them to me at this time? So another example of a poorly timed engagement, something we want to work away from. The next problem that we're going to try to solve is the disconnected legacy systems. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, I talked to a lot of customers, and a lot of customers say, well, I've listened and I've collected this data. Right? Everyone's told me for the last decade to collect data and use it, but now how do I actually put this in one place, manage it easily, and then deploy solutions without having to involve my engineering team, my growth team, my sales team? How do I do that in a simplified manner? So AWS and Pinpoint specifically looks to solve that pain point. And then limited touch points. So what does this mean? Well, I think a lot about the channels in which to gauge people. So, right, there's the conventional channels, email, push, SMS. I think we're all very familiar with those. But what about the new channels? Like, what about WeChat, Line, Weibo, Facebook, Instagram, right? How do you connect with consumers on those channels? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're trying to get towards is communication with a customer, right, on their turf at the time that they want, with the message and content that they value. So these are the problems that we're gonna try to solve. And the last one, minimal customer data insights. So how do you stitch this together? This relates to item 3, is the really insights component of user engagement. So how do I know that my messages are being effective? And so when we go into the demo, I'll highlight this because, at least in my mind, every time you engage with your users over whatever channel, that's an opportunity for you to get better the next time, because the customers are telling you indirectly whether they valued it based on the action they took, right? Did they unsubscribe? Did they forward it? Did they delete it? Did they read it? How long did they spend on it, right? These are all signals that help the next campaign that you send. So then there's some more macro trends. From the customers, we know that personalized, relevant, timely are important. So this is a little bit more from the previous slide. We know that customized notifications receive more engagement than generic. We talk about the channels, right? How do you interact with someone on their terms? And then there's some more macro shifts in the market, right? Younger generations prefer mobile. It's actually pretty exciting to see some data out there that younger folks don't want to talk to anyone on the phone, right? They want to chat. They want to have a conversation. I know I fall into that category, right? I'd rather just talk to the Amazon customer rep over the text messaging in the M-Shop app than call them. So that's just sort of like some of these macro trends that we think are tailwinds to what we're doing. Further emerging markets, so we think globally at AWS, or I think about my customers not just in the US, but in India and China, and there's different constraints. So it sometimes makes it difficult, and how do you build tools or an application for folks globally? But when you keep some of these trends in mind, it actually makes the decision process in the stack ranking easier. So emerging markets, right? It's mobile first. They're skipping web portals, and smartphone adoption is rising, right? They're leapfrogging the landlines just because that infrastructure wasn't there, and there's no need for it now. And then universally, we know all consumers want personalized engagement. They want purchasing products to be easy, frictionless, right? Less clicks is more. And then they demand services via the channel of their choice. I've said that point 3 times because I think that's important, the channel of their choice. The channels are evolving, right? A few years ago, there was no concept of voice. Now I think there's a really strong drive to engage over voice. And I think there's a lot of new tools that we'll talk about on the next slide that make this sort of channel of choice. It's easy to determine that through some of the ML models that you can incorporate to your engagement. Okay, so the next slide. So I mentioned earlier that AWS has a lot of services, and that can make it difficult. So that's part of my job is to help you understand what's out there for you to use. So we're going to dive deep into Amazon Pinpoint, which is highlighted here, but I did want to briefly touch on a few other of the core digital user engagement components. So the next two are Amazon SES and Amazon SNS. So these are two AWS services that are really focused on one use case. And so their idea is we're going to go really deep on one particular component and not focus on some of the other wider pieces of engagement. So Amazon SES on top, that is the simple email service. That focuses on high volume transactional workloads. So think about your receipts that you receive when you swipe with Squarespace, or your end of the month receipt that you get from Netflix. SES powers those transactional email workloads. And then you have Amazon Simple Notification Service, and this really focuses on the high volume, more application to end user messaging workloads. Next, I want to talk about how you can start to stitch some of these together to take these services, these primitives, and make them solutions. And that's a distinction that I like to talk about just for a minute. So these are all services behind me, right? These are, you can spin them up yourselves. There's utility pricing. It's the traditional AWS approach, which is great, right? It works very well. What I've seen from, and what customers have told me, is when you start to stitch some of these services together and create a solution, that's when you really start to unlock a lot of power. And so the two that are highlighted in blue are Amazon Comprehend and Lambda. So if you're staying for the 11 o'clock session, we're actually going to do a demo using these three services, Lambda, Comprehend, and Pinpoint. I'm going to take some of the theory that I talk about today and show you in practice. But if you're not going to be able to stay there, I'll just touch briefly on this. So Amazon Comprehend is AWS's natural language processing service. So what does that mean? Well, it can take text and it can understand the intent, the components, the keywords, the subjects, the predicates. It can really deconstruct sentences and tell you what that user is saying. What's the sentiment? Positive, negative, neutral. It can give you all this information about text. Okay, so on standalone, it's powerful. You can say, wow, that's neat. I could upload, all my marketing content and really understand how the sentiment is of that. Correct, that's great. But what's exciting, what we'll show at 11 o'clock is, how can you build Comprehend into Pinpoint and Lambda and then use something like Twitter to understand every single tweet that your customers are saying? So that's, again, what we'll do at 11 o'clock. But that just is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of building solutions for your user engagement. The next two that I highlighted are Lex and Connect. These are AWS services that help with text-to-speech, chats, and customer service. So we highlight these because this is all a core component of user engagement. I think a lot of people think about user engagement as marketing, and it is. There's a large component of it. But there's also this whole other side of engagement, which is, now that you've made the sale, how do you retain the customer? Now that they've downloaded the app, how do you ensure they don't churn? And so some of these other solutions can help you manage your customers. Amazon Connect specifically is more of a customer service, contact center approach. Next and last is Amazon Machine Learning. So I highlight this because customers often ask, how do I infer actions from my customers' indirect actions? So what I mean by that is your customers are engaging with your website, your application. They're clicking around. They're doing different things. So how do you actually make sense of all that? And I think it's really difficult to do. I don't think that anyone's really out there has solved that and said, here's the exact way. But ML gets us closer. And again, a plug for the 11 o'clock session, we're going to talk about how you can easily deploy ML workloads with your user engagement, with an emphasis on easily, because it's not traditionally been simple to do. Okay, so now we're going to go a little bit deeper into Amazon Pinpoint. Usually folks are vaguely familiar with the service, so I like to really set the stage. So how can Amazon Pinpoint transform user engagement? Well, I think a lot about how I can help you with all the data you have on your customers to create successful messaging across channels. So I know that everyone out there has a lot of data, right? You've collected it, you've told me that. But how can Pinpoint help you visualize it? And then after visualizing it, how can Pinpoint help you take action on it? So there's 5 real components, core components to the Pinpoint service. So the first is collect device data. So there's native and JS SDKs that help you detect and collect device data. So this is pretty simple. I think everyone sort of understands this component. It's what devices, make, model, platform are your users using when they come to the website or the application. This is helpful. I think a good example is one of our internal customers uses this to determine what app version people are on, because they constantly want to get people to upgrade to the latest app version. So by collecting the device data, they understand that they're on app version 1.2. And so they can send notifications just to those people on 1.2 saying, hey, there's a lot of great features in 1.3, swipe to upgrade, or something along those lines. So the second part of Pinpoint is to collect this interaction data. This, for me, is what's most exciting, right? This is your customers telling you exactly what they want. And interaction data is events. So Pinpoint ingests the events that you send it. You can use the APIs or the SDKs. And so the event data would be something like session start, movie watch, song listen to. And so Pinpoint can collect all that for you. And not only collect it, but then help you understand what it means. I think a good example here is one of our referenceable customers, Hulu, uses Amazon Pinpoint to really understand the different segments of their audience. And so Pinpoint helps them understand what their audience is most interested in, which then drives the decision-making process on who to engage, what to send, when to send it. So that leads to the third component of the service, which is this segmentation tools. So I think most of the folks in the audience are familiar with segmentation tools, but in short, what Pinpoint does is it says, okay, you have 1,000 people in your application. How can I help you slice and dice it into smaller cohorts that are most interested? So we'll just give this 1 second. Make sure this earthquake drill is really a drill. Good to know. Okay, so for those of you that are online streaming, there's an earthquake drill that they're announcing, but I guess it doesn't apply to us. So on the third point, the segmentation tools. So this is the tools that you can use to create the smaller cohorts of liked consumers, right? People that you think are going to engage with your notifications. And then, of course, Pinpoint supports the ability to send these notifications, right? That's often overlooked, but that last mile, getting the push notification, the text message, the email to the customer at the right time is supported within this console experience. And again, we'll get to the demo because I think it's really exciting to show you actually how it works in practice, but I'm just sort of setting the stage here. Last is learning the customer preferences and characteristics. So I mentioned that because Pinpoint has the idea of users, right? Users would be you and me. And Pinpoint allows you to create profiles about these users. And so even if you don't want to have messaging use cases today, I always tell customers, if you're not sure how you're going to reach your customers or what your strategy is, you can at least start to build this profile. So you can understand when they use your application, what they're doing on your application, what their preferences are, what's their favorite, whatever character, team, anything that you want to track, you can define it as an event. Pinpoint can ingest it and then set it to the endpoint level. So I always recommend that just building this profile that you can action upon later is powerful. So what does successful engagement look like? We have this little infinity loop here. I'll go quickly through this because I do think it's intuitive, right? Everyone in this room knows what successful engagement looks like because we are the subject of it every day. So it starts with some brand, company, application reaching out. They engage with you with a notification. And then we capture the events and metrics on that notification. How did it perform? Right? That's the job of Pinpoint, is to do that heavy lifting for you, to tell you how it performed so you can get better. And then it's to that last point, building the profile of your user, segmenting the users based on the profile attributes, factoring in time, location, context, understanding more about each individual person. I'll stop here for just a moment because I think time is really important. Some people, they get up early. They're up at 5 a.m. and they're out the door. If you know that about an endpoint, about this user, Maybe you can understand when's the best time to send them a notification. Maybe you know that they don't really start getting busy at work until 8 when they stop using your application. So maybe sending a notification before 8 a.m. is better. We don't know, but you can infer based on trial and error. And Pinpoint has those tools, right? There's A/B testing, there's holdout. There's a lot of ways you can really see if the impact of your notification is statistically significant relative to the control. Identifying signals, which is simply did they engage. Optimizing the content that you share with them. So this is this sort of continual feedback loop of iterating and improving, and then remessaging the user. So this is sort of the cycle that we think about. And on each one of these points, so on these 8 points, Pinpoint tries to make it easy for you to accomplish this, right? Whether it's content management, profiling, profiles, segmentation, that's sort of our job, is to make the heavy lifting easy for you all. So how do you build a stack for user engagement with AWS? So I think the first step is always understand what channels you're interested in. There's these channels, and then there's, of course, more, right? There's web push, there's mobile apps, there's voice, email, SMS. So I think it's really about defining what's important for your customers. Right? If you have a mobile game and you know that push notifications are, 1, very cost effective, and 2, the customer is using the application or frequently using it, then that might be a better approach than saying an email campaign. So defining your channels, I think, is step 1. And then step 2 is sort of the yellow boxes, is what components of this engagement do you need to stitch together or leverage? And these are the different AWS services, right? These are sort of what they can do for you. So now I'm going to go into the demo portion. For the demo portion, I always like to make it interactive. If you have questions, feel free to let me know. We are live streaming this, so I'll just repeat the question and then answer. But yeah, let's switch over and look at Amazon Pinpoint. Great, let me refresh, make sure I haven't timed out. Perfect. Can everyone see? Yep. Okay, great. So what you're looking at now is Amazon Pinpoint. This is the console that you would see today if you went in and spun up a project. So on the left-hand side is really where you navigate through all the core components of the service. So if you recall a few slides back, I said there's really 5 core components. This is where you drive and define those services that you want to leverage. So I start with analytics because analytics, right, drives everything. Analytics drives the segmentation drives the campaigns, and then the metrics from the campaign feed back into the analytics, and you start the process over again. I like to go down to demographics because it's visual, so I think it's always helpful to sort of show you what is discussed. So here are these standard attributes. So if you remember, point 1 that I talked about was collecting this device data. So here I have the composition of the organization I'm a part of. So I went around to all the different teams in my org and said, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself and fill out this survey, more or less, so I could collect data and build a profile. Some of this is fictitious. For example, we don't exactly have 35%, 31, and 34 for the different platforms. But it shows you how, at a glance, you can start to understand the profile of my audience. So you can see here, just by looking, that the vast majority of people are on another app version. So if you're an app developer and you want to know which app version your consumers are on, you don't have to write any queries. You don't have to do any surveys, right? You've got it all here visualized. So Pinpoint abstracts away that heavy lifting. Similarly for device model, let's say you want to run a promotion specific for a Samsung device or an Apple device. Well, you could see the size of the segment, and then simply click into it and understand that this is a segment you want to define and a segment that you want to action. So these are the standard attributes. Again, these are, I think, valuable, but what's more exciting to me is really the custom attributes. So the custom attributes are what you define. And so this is where you make Pinpoint your own. So a custom attribute can be anything you want. And an attribute describes a user. So if you recall, a user would be me and you, and these attributes would describe us. So I look down here, and when it says AWS team, right, this is describing the different people on the different teams. So I'm a part of the Amazon Pinpoint team, so I would fall under this yellow bucket. We look at favorite food, favorite NFL team. This is all sort of data that I've aggregated, but you can start to get a sense of who your customers are and what they value. And so why am I sort of explaining all this to you? Well, this drives the segmentation tool, which I'll show next. So let's say I want it, favorite sport. I want people that are just soccer fans whose favorite restaurant is Papa John's, and favorite, favorite NFL team is the Rams. Whatever it might be. But this segment now is very specific, right? It's soccer fans that are also NFL fans, Rams specifically, that like Papa John's pizza. So now that I've got this data collected, I can create a segment and then create a campaign. So I'm going to show you what that looks like next. So we'll go ahead and create a campaign, and this is pretty similar. Let me zoom in for everyone. So this should be pretty similar to anyone that's used any sort of campaign management tool. It's a simple 5-step process. And I highlight that because in 5 steps we're going to launch a campaign. But there's a lot of power in these 5 steps. Earlier I talked about how can you test, how can you do a control and hold out, how can you set quiet times so you're not sending that email at 2 a.m. That's all driven from one 5-step process. So I'll go quickly through this. So let's say all hands demo take 2. I'll call out certain features that I think are important. I won't go through each of them. Happy to discuss them in more detail afterwards, but I'll just sort of highlight what's important. So we're going to do a standard campaign, but just note that you have the ability to do A/B/N testing. Additionally, there's a lot of different settings that you can control here. So this might look like a lot, but these things are really important. So I'll highlight just a couple. So max daily messages per endpoint. This protects your customer, your end user. So again, I like to bring the examples to the really real-world scenarios. I've received notifications from brands like 6 or 7 a day, to the point where the first couple were really good, and then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, I started to say, hey, I'd appreciate if you stopped, bugging me all the time. So these controls here protect your customers, max daily messages. So you can just set this to whatever you'd like, and now all endpoints will only receive 1 notification a day. This is important for customers that have different teams using Pinpoint, because different teams have different objectives and priorities. So controlling some of the engagement settings ensure that your end user doesn't receive too many notifications. Some of the other things, I'll just call it briefly, max campaigns. So this is similar to the daily messages, but with campaigns, it's specific to the campaign you're setting up. The call out here is a lot of customers use marketing automation with Pinpoint, right? They want to set something up once, and then they want to look at the metrics, and they don't necessarily want to have to reset it up every single day. So an example of this would be a first-time user experience. So you have someone who downloads your application, and you want to walk them through the FTUE, first-time user experience. You never want to walk that person through the FTUE again because they're not a first-time user. So by setting this campaign cap to 1, you know that this automated campaign that's going to run every single day would never send the same customer the notification twice. So it's really one of those things where people say devil's in the details. I do believe in that. To really create this effective engagement, you have to monitor sort of all the different controls so that you're perfecting each notification. So Pinpoint likes to do that for you, right? We want to take the hard work away. Messages per second, this is just protection so you don't accidentally DDoS your own system, right? If you send out 1 million notifications and all of a sudden 500,000 people open up your application, that could have downstream impact. So just some toggles here for you to easily control. So let's just go through. So this step 1 is creating campaigns. Step 2 is choosing a segment. So on the previous slide, I showed you the analytics component. And now you'll see the analytics come through with the segmentation tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say all hands demo take 2. And I want to start defining criteria that to engage with. So I think in the previous page, I talked about soccer fans and football fans, so let's just do that. So I've got my organization's data, and now I want to start creating filters. So these filters help you define who receives a notification. So let's go to favorite NFL team, and we'll choose, I'll cater to the crowd a bit, so we'll choose the 49ers. And then let's say that's not specific enough, right? 49ers is a wide category. That could be a lot of different people. Some people in the 49ers fans could dislike pizza. Some people could only eat pizza. So let's drill in a little bit more. So let's say their favorite food is not pasta. And let's go a little further, and let's say they're only using Apple devices. Now, I have no idea why this segment would be constructed. Maybe there's a promotion that you want to run to only Apple devices for 49ers fans that don't like pizza. Maybe, let's say, is there pizza and pasta? I don't know, but the takeaway here is, with a few clicks, you can easily define a very specific segment. Everyone's sort of used to hearing the phrase, the better the data you put in, the better the data you put out. And that's true for Pinpoint as well. The more event data you collect and allow Pinpoint to organize for you, the easier these tools and more powerful these tools become. Great, so I'm going to create this email now that goes out. I'll say free food, not pizza or pasta, so I don't scare people away. And then personalized notification. So one of the points we had on the earlier slides was no one likes generic notifications. Personally, when I see an email that doesn't have my name, I immediately think it's just sort of a blast notification. So Pinpoint enables that customization. So as you'll see here, I'm just creating a random note. So thanks for subscribing. Here is your okay, so oversimplifying a bit, but essentially what I'm highlighting here is the ability to pull in that user's attribute value. So again, users would be me and you. Attributes would be things that describe them. And through this personalization, through this templating, I'll pull in the value specific to that user. So my name is Zach, and so this would read, Zach, thanks for subscribing. Here is your 50%, whatever you've defined as the discount code. Enjoy. A couple of powerful tools that I always like to call out. Obviously, you can preview, test, and save templates. That's important if you have different folks on the team that want to see the messages, as it actually appears. There's a plain text version that's there as well. Next is the scheduling component. I think the call out here is about automating some of the tasks that you do often. So of course we could send this out immediately, great, but that last 5 minutes means that I would have to do that process again. But if I wanted this to go out, let's say every day at 9 a.m., I could set this up once, and then the people that receive the notification would be different every single day. So that segment would be dynamic, meaning people would come in and out of the segment depending on the actions they took. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, in this example, my favorite team is the 49ers, and tomorrow in the application, I flip it to the Seahawks. I'm from Seattle. And so when you flip to the Seahawks, that user's attribute value will now update automatically. Pinpoint manages that for you, which means when this campaign runs the next day and it evaluates all the users based on the criteria we set in the filters, it will now exclude me from that campaign. I know it's a very overly simplified concept, but it's powerful because you don't have to constantly worry about who's coming in and out of your segments. Pinpoint will do that for you. There's a question in the back. Yes? It does. Yeah, it has two numbers that are important. One, it'll tell you the actual number of customers that the notification will reach. and then it also has a number of customers that are eligible to receive it. And the difference between the two is for certain notifications, good example would be push notifications, customers can opt out. And so you want to see sort of who's all eligible to receive it, and then who will actually receive it, with the delta being the people that have opted in and opted out. Yeah, good question. Yeah, sure, another question.
So can it be event driven? Like, does it have some API access? So, based on certain users' action, trigger.
Sure. So the question was, can I trigger campaigns based on events? So a user, let's say, clicks check in. Can I then immediately fire a campaign that says, welcome, your notification? So there's two parts to two answers to your question. The short and direct answer is there's no event-driven functionality natively built into the console today. Like I said before the presentation started, 80 to 90% of what we build is based on customer feedback, and I've heard that feedback a lot. So I'll leave that there. The second part, the longer part, is anything you want to build is possible in the sense that you could simply watch all the events that come into Pinpoint. Right? It's really easy to look at the Kinesis stream and see what's coming through. And you could just have a Lambda watcher looking for certain events that would then call the API to trigger a send message or a campaign.
So at least there's a basic API too.
Yes, yes.
So next question is, so you showed us that, customers, based on customers' property or attributes. But what if customer, is it possible to add additional attribute? Say, I like to receive like 100 notifications per day. I don't care. So based on certain those kind of attributes, can this be configured that way?
Sure. So the question is, I'm just repeating the question so everyone can hear. The question was, can I define attributes for users that override some of the filters I put in place, or?
Well, based on your previous trace cycle.
Yep.
There's
Some of these campaign settings here.
yeah, right.
Yep.
Maxes out in messages.
Sure.
So can those be attributes?
They could. They could be an attribute, and then what you could do is you could select a segment of those users based on that attribute for your notification. So, for example, if you want to receive 100 notifications or every single one, when you're going through that segmentation component, you could say filter, give me everyone who has this attribute value, so that you're ensuring that those people are included in your engagement. There would be some work to be done on the controls, just making sure that some of the controls don't prevent the notifications, but I can talk more about maybe your specific use case afterwards, and we could brainstorm what would work.
Yeah, just wondering, if this, I guess this is built for general marketing purposes. I was just wondering if this can be utilized for, any applications
Yep.
instead of, human strength function.
Yeah, great question, and something I do want to mention. So a lot of the demo today is about the user friendliness of Amazon Pinpoint, right? That goes back to the point earlier about enabling your teams to use and define engagement without having to loop in your developer teams every time you want to do something. But like every AWS service, Pinpoint serves developers as well as the marketer persona. So there's APIs, SDKs, any of the functionality you'd expect from AWS is there. So you can set up things programmatically. So that's the campaign workflow. I'm going to go down here to talk a little bit more about some of the more advanced settings. So really the call out here is there's a lot more you can do. And I'll be here after the presentation to take more detailed questions. But the call out here is your data is yours. Pinpoint has no desire to create the stickiness of your data only residing within Pinpoint. And I think that's an important call out. Because we want to enable you to send your data anywhere. So via event stream, you can define your event stream, which essentially allows you to pipe the data to Amazon Kinesis. And Amazon Kinesis, for those of you not familiar, can more or less send the data to whatever destination you'd like. So again, it's really easy to do. You can just provide Pinpoint, the Amazon resource name, the ARN, and once you drop that in, or you can choose a Kinesis stream from the dropdown, we'll automatically stream that data. So let's say you use a third-party visualization tool, and you don't want to migrate off that. 100% agree. Like you define the tools that make you most successful. So by streaming this to S3 or Redshift or wherever your destination is, then you can use your existing services to visualize or segment or just store the data if you'd like. So I'm going to stop there because I always like to leave about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll do 10 minutes for break, and I'm back at 11, so I want to make sure everyone gets a break before I have another session with you all. So I'll stop there. I'd like to take any questions you might have. This was a high level, right? There's a lot of things that go on in the analytics space, as well as some of the more conversational components to the service. But I want to make sure that we have time for everyone to ask any questions. Yeah. Yeah, correct. Yes. The question was, instead of Constant Contact or MailChimp, can I use this? You can, and Pinpoint's charter, right? Our objective is to make your user engagement needs across channels simplified, and so we think a lot about having one service, Pinpoint, manage a variety of workloads, not just email. So that's the only call out there. Is it could be email, but it could also be using Pinpoint to call Lambda function to send a payload to Facebook Messenger. Sure, yeah. And in the next presentation, we're going to do that. So the question was, can I put AI, machine learning behind some of my engagement? And the answer is yes, right? AWS has a variety of services, and you can create any sort of scenario you'd like by leveraging the different services. And in the next session, we're going to leverage the ML-based Amazon Comprehend service and Pinpoint to show what ML engagement looks like. Any other questions? Let me check online. Sometimes there's questions from the Twitch group. Looks like we're good there. Yeah, question in the back? Yeah, so the question was integrations and how can I use multiple tools. And so at first I'd agree with you. Like, there's some fantastic solutions out there, and we know that Pinpoint's not going to be able to be the one-stop shop for everything. So the way we think about integrations is first making it easy for you to get the data out and the data into Pinpoint. So you can stream the data to your other point solution providers, as well as stream the data back into Pinpoint using the Put Events API. So I think the call out there also is, by making it easy to stream data in, you could also add data to Pinpoint from offline solutions. So an example would be, I thought this actually pretty interesting. A customer uses Pinpoint, and they have a lot of offline events, a lot of concerts and parks and different cities. So they can't stream that data in real time to Pinpoint. It'd be cost prohibitive, and there's really no use case that they want to enable in real time. So what they do is, after these events, they'll stream the data to the Put Events to update the users' attribute values, and so then Pinpoint has awareness of it. And that enables them to send engagement based on offline events. So think of any sort of point of sale that you're not streaming in real time. But yeah, for integrations, yeah, certainly. We want to make it easy for you to plug and play however you see best. Great. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, just if you're sticking around for 11 o'clock, I'll be here again. We're going to do a live demo, so we'll actually show you what a lot of what we talked about looks like. And yeah, thanks for joining.